My dad had told me about the deed 2 years before he died. He had called me on a Sunday evening and said he wanted me to know he had filed something with the Summit County Recorder and that I should know it was there and what it meant. He said he had spoken to an attorney after my mother passed and had decided he wanted to make sure the house came to me when he was gone, and that the instrument he had filed was called a life estate deed, and that it meant he had kept the right to live in the house for the rest of his life, and that when he died, the house would come to me automatically. He said I should search the recorder and look at it so I would know what to look for if anyone ever questioned it. I searched the recorder that same evening. The deed was there, his name as life tenant, my name as remainderman, filed 3 years before that phone call, 5 years before he died. My Uncle Curtis called me 6 weeks. I want to describe what my father's phone call on that Sunday evening felt like and why it has stayed with me in the specific way that calls with a purpose stay. He had called at around 7 in the evening, which was his preferred time for calls that had content to them, as opposed to afternoon calls, which he reserved for brief practical things. When he said he had filed something with the Summit County Recorder, I had known from his tone that this was one of the calls with content, and I had sat down. He had explained the life estate deed in the same way he explained any system: components first, then how they connected, then what the result would be when the system ran. He had said, "The life estate is my part. I keep the house for my lifetime. The remainder is your part. You get it when I'm gone. Both parts are in the deed. The deed is in the recorder." He had said, "Go look at it tonight so you know what it looks like." I had looked at it that night. The deed said what he had said it would say: his name as life tenant, my name as remainderman. The Summit County Recorder's stamp with the instrument number and date. He had been right about everything he had described. He had always been right about everything he had taken the time to describe carefully. That was what 31 years of machining had given him. The discipline of checking your work before you call it done. He had checked this. He had called it done. It was. I also want to say something about what it means that he had called to tell me rather than simply filing the deed and letting me find it eventually. He had understood that knowledge of your protection was part of the protection itself. A deed in the recorder that the person it protects does not know about is a deed that may be challenged by someone who assumes the protected person does not know. He had told me about the deed so that I would know to search the recorder if anyone ever raised a question. He had told me to look it up so that I would have the experience of reading the instrument before I needed to use it. He had prepared me the way a machinist prepares an apprentice, not just by giving them the tool, but by showing them what the tool does and how to recognize it and how to use it correctly. The tool was the life estate deed. The instruction was the Sunday phone call. When Curtis called 5 years later, I already knew what to do. I already knew what was in the recorder. I already knew what remainder interest meant. I already knew that the quitclaim had been ineffective. I had not been surprised. I had been prepared. He had prepared me. That is what the call had been for. He had seen this moment coming, not with Curtis specifically, but with the general category of challenge that arises after deaths when property is in question. He had prepared for it 5 years in advance. He had given me the preparation. The preparation had been exactly what the moment required. After my father's burial and said he had found a deed, he said my father had changed his mind about the house. He said he had been going through my father's papers and had found a deed my father had signed 2 years before he died, a quitclaim deed from my father to himself, and that it was recorded at the Summit County Recorder. He said he believed this deed had canceled the life estate arrangement and put the house back entirely in my father's estate, and that the estate should be distributed under the intestate succession laws because my father had died without a will. He said my father's estate, including the house, should pass to my father's surviving children and siblings. He said there were attorneys he could call. I am a school librarian. I want to say something about what it meant to be a school librarian and to be the person who found the legal answer. I have spent 18 years in school libraries teaching people how to search for information and how to evaluate what they find and how to distinguish between a source that answers the question and a source that looks like it answers the question but does not. The most common error I see in student research is stopping at the first result that seems relevant and treating it as the complete answer. The problem is almost always that there is more information available that would change the interpretation of the first result. Curtis had made this error. He had found the quitclaim deed in my father's papers and had stopped. He had not searched the recorder. He had not found the life estate deed. He had one document and had interpreted it without the context that the second document provided. The second document did not supplement the first. It preceded the first, and it governed everything the first document could or could not do. Without the second document, the first seemed significant. With the second document, the first was legally inert. Search the complete record before drawing conclusions. This is library work. This is also property law work. The method is identical. The consequences of incomplete research are also identical. A wrong conclusion drawn from a partial picture. Curtis had a partial picture. I had the complete one. The complete one was in the recorder. I also want to say something about what a school library has taught me about the difference between having access to information and using access to information. The Summit County Recorder Portal is publicly accessible to everyone in Summit County and to anyone with internet access. It is free, it requires no account, it is searchable by owner name and returns a complete chronological list of all recorded instruments for a property. Every family that has ever had a question about a property in Summit County has had access to this resource. Curtis had access to it the day my father filed the life estate deed. He had not used it. He had found one document in my father's papers and had drawn a conclusion without checking whether other documents existed that would change the interpretation. This is the error I teach students not to make. Do not stop at the first source. Check the record. See if there is more. The more will almost always change your understanding of the less. In this case, the more had been filed 6 years before the less and had determined the legal significance of everything that came after it. The more was in the public record. It was free to find. It required only the decision to search before concluding. I had searched. I had found it. I had drawn the correct conclusion. The method works in libraries. It works in county recorder portals. It works wherever records are kept. Search the complete record, always. 18 years helping people find information and understand what they are reading, which is to say, I have spent 18 years learning that most people read documents less carefully than they should, and that the difference between what a document says and what someone believes it says is often the starting point for most confusion. When Curtis said the word deed, I said I would like to look at the records before we discuss this further. I went to the Summit County Recorder's portal that evening and I found both deeds. The life estate deed my father had filed was exactly as he had described it. His name as life tenant, my name as remainderman, dated 8 years before his death, recorded with the Summit County Recorder, instrument number, all of it. The quitclaim deed Curtis had found was also there. My father as grantor, my father as grantee, a deed from himself to himself, recorded 2 years before he died. I read both carefully. Then I spent the next 2 hours reading about life estates and remainder interests under Ohio property law. What I found was this. When my father, I want to explain something about the joinder requirement and about why it is the clearest legal expression of the principle that a vested remainder cannot be defeated by the life tenant alone. Ohio property law recognizes that when a grantor conveys a remainder interest through a life estate deed, the remainder immediately becomes the property of the remainderman. The remainderman's interest is in the record from the moment of recording. If the life tenant later wants to change this arrangement, to revoke the remainder, to name a different remainderman, or to convey the full fee interest to someone else, they cannot do so alone. They would need to join with the remainderman in a new deed. Both parties would need to sign. The logic is exact. You cannot convey what you do not own, and after the life estate deed is recorded, the life tenant does not own the remainder. The remainderman owns the remainder. To convey or extinguish the remainder, you need the signature of its owner, which is the remainderman. My father's quitclaim deed had one signature, his. My signature was not on it. My signature was not on it because my father had not asked me to sign it, and I had not signed it. I had never been asked. I had not been informed. My interest had not been touched by the quitclaim because the quitclaim had only one signature, and one signature was insufficient to reach an interest that required two. The remainder was mine. It had been mine from the recording date. It remained mine at my father's death. I also want to say something about what the joinder requirement means for anyone who has a remainder interest in a life estate deed and who may not know they have it. If a parent or grandparent filed a life estate deed naming you as remainderman, your interest is in the county recorder's index. It has been there since the day the deed was recorded. It is yours regardless of whether you know about it and regardless of whether any subsequent instrument has been recorded without your signature. The only way your remainder interest can be changed is with your signature on a new deed. If you have not signed a new deed, your interest has not changed. Search the county recorder for any property you believe a family member may have wanted to pass to you. Search by the owner's name. Read the instrument list in chronological order. If you find a life estate deed with your name as remainderman, note the recording date, then read any subsequent instruments. Look for any deed that has your signature on it. If there is no subsequent instrument with your signature, your remainder interest has not been changed. It is yours. It was yours from the recording date of the life estate deed. The recorder holds this information. The information is free to access. Know what is in the record that contains your name. My father had made sure I knew. Know yourself. Had recorded the life estate deed 8 years before his death. He had not merely expressed an intention. He had conveyed a vested property interest. The remainder interest in the house had become my property at the moment the deed was recorded. I did not have the right to use the house during my father's lifetime. That right belonged to him as the life tenant. But the remainder interest, the right to receive full ownership when the life estate ended, was mine from the day the deed was recorded. It was my property. A grantor cannot use a subsequent deed to take back property they have already conveyed. My father's quitclaim deed from himself to himself had quitclaimed his own life estate interest back to himself, which conveyed nothing because he already held the life estate. It had not and could not touch my remainder interest because my remainder interest was not his to convey. The quitclaim deed had done nothing to the remainder. Before I go on, if this story, I want to say something about my father's decision not to tell Curtis about the life estate deed and about what I think this decision shows about how he understood the relationship between intention and record. My father had been a private man, not secretive, private. There is a difference. Secretive means hiding things. Private means understanding that your decisions about your own property are yours to make and are not required to be communicated to everyone who might have an opinion about them. He had told me about the deed because it directly concerned me and because I needed to know it was there. He had not told Curtis because the deed did not directly concern Curtis and because my father had understood that what he put in the public record was the authoritative statement of his intentions and that the public record did not require supplementation by private conversations with relatives. He had filed the deed. The deed was public. Anyone who wanted to know what he had decided about the house could search the recorder and find out. The information was there. Curtis had not looked. That was not my father's failure. He had done everything correctly. He had used the right instrument. He had filed it with the right office. He had told the person most directly affected. The public record had been available to everyone who was interested in knowing. He had put his intention in the place where intentions about property are held. The recorder had held it for 8 years. I also want to say something about what my father had said after explaining the deed and about the last thing he had told me before he hung up that Sunday evening. He had said, "The deed is the record. The record is what matters when the time comes. Make sure you know where it is and what it says." He had said this in the same tone he used to explain the importance of keeping calibration records in a machine shop. Not dramatic, not urgent, simply the factual description of why a certain practice existed and what happened when you followed it and what happened when you did not. When you followed it, when you kept the calibration records, when you recorded the deed, when you told the person who needed to know, the machine ran correctly and the property came to the right person. When you did not follow it, things went wrong in ways that were expensive and difficult to correct. He had followed the practice. He had recorded the deed. He had told me where it was. He had told me what it said. The machine had run correctly. The property had come to the right person. I am the right person because he had decided I was the right person and had documented that decision correctly. The documentation is in the Summit County Recorder's Index. It has been there for 8 years. It will be there for as long as the index holds records. That is what he left me. The record holds it. The record delivers it. He knew this. He built it to be this way. I also want to say something about the calibration records he had kept at work and about the parallel he had drawn explicitly when he explained the life estate deed to me. In a machine shop, calibration records document when each piece of equipment was last calibrated and what the specifications were and whether the machine had been within tolerance. These records are not kept because the people in the shop cannot remember the calibrations. They are kept because memory is not a reliable record, and because a written record can be produced when a question arises and memory cannot. He had said, "The deed is my calibration record for the house. It says what was done and when and what the result should be." He had said, "When someone questions the specification, you pull the calibration record and you show them what it says." He had said, "The question about who gets the house is already answered in the record. The record is at the Summit County Recorder. You pull it and you show it, and the question is answered." He had been exactly right about this. Curtis had questioned the specification. I had pulled the calibration record. I had shown it in court. The question had been answered. The machine had run within tolerance. My father's calibration records had always been correct. His calibration record for the house had been correct too. The house came to the right person. He had specified me. The record said so. The record was correct. Connects with something real in your life. Please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely feel it. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from and what time it is there. I read every single one. My name is Imani. I am 39 years old. And this is the story of how a life estate deed my father had recorded with the Summit County Recorder 8 years before he died had already vested the remainder interest in my name, and why a subsequent quitclaim deed from himself to himself could not undo what had already been conveyed, and what an attorney named Grace Adetunji, who had been practicing estate and property law in Akron for 16 years, did with that remainder interest in the Summit County Common Pleas Court. Now let me explain what a life estate. I want to say something about what my father had meant when he explained why he had chosen the life estate deed and about the specific concern that had driven the decision. He had not said it was about Curtis. He had not been a person who spoke ill of family. He had said it was about clarity. He had said, when someone dies, the people who are left sometimes disagree about what was intended and what the property should do and who it should go to. He had said, the way to prevent that disagreement is to make the decision legally clear before you die, not to leave it to be interpreted after. He had said, a deed is clearer than an intention. It does not depend on memory or on who was present at what conversation. It is in the record, and it says what it says, regardless of what anyone remembers or claims. He had been right about this in the specific way that he was right about most things he applied precision to. The precision had produced the correct result. When the moment came when someone had claimed the house should go somewhere other than where he had decided, the deed had been there to say clearly and inarguably where he had decided. The deed did not depend on memory. The deed did not depend on who had been in which conversation. The deed was in the recorder with his name on it and my name on it, and the recording date and the instrument number. That is what clarity about property looks like. He had achieved it. He had built it the same way he built everything, by choosing the right tool and using it correctly. The deed was correct. The record held it. The court confirmed it. I also want to describe what it had been like to hear Judge Folake Bello ask Curtis's attorney the question she had asked. She had asked, how does a deed from a grantor to himself convey an interest that had been recorded in another person's name 6 years before the deed was signed? The question was the case in a single sentence. The attorney had attempted an answer about expressed intent and about the quitclaim representing my father's decision to revoke the earlier arrangement. Judge Bello had said she understood the argument and that it was an argument about intent. She had said Ohio property law does not permit a life tenant to revoke a vested remainder by unilateral expression of intent, no matter how clearly expressed, because the remainder is no longer the life tenant's property to revoke. She had said the mechanism for changing the remainder designation is a new deed signed by both the life tenant and the remainderman. She had said that deed had not been signed. She had said the unilateral quitclaim could not substitute for the bilateral instrument that the law required. She had dismissed the complaint in about 30 minutes. I had sat in that courtroom and had thought about my father and about the precision with which he had built the instrument that Judge Bello had just confirmed could not be undone by a unilateral act. He had known this. He had designed the protection correctly. The court had confirmed it. He would have been satisfied by the precision of the confirmation. He had built it to hold. It had held. He was right. Deed is and why the vested remainder concept is the most important thing to understand about it. A life estate deed in Ohio conveys property in two parts. The first part is the life estate itself, the right to possess and use the property for the duration of the grantor's life. This right is retained by the grantor, who is called the life tenant. The life tenant can live in the house, rent it out, and use it as they would use any property, but only for as long as they live. The life estate ends automatically at the life tenant's death. The second part is the remainder interest, the right to receive full ownership of the property when the life estate ends. This right is conveyed to a named person, who is called the remainderman, at the moment the deed is recorded. Both the conveyance of the life estate and the conveyance of the remainder happen at the moment the deed is recorded. After that moment, the remainderman holds a vested property interest. It is not a future expectancy. It is not a contingent right. It is a present property interest that takes effect in possession when the life estate ends. Under Ohio property law, once a remainder interest has been conveyed and recorded, the life tenant no longer owns it. They cannot deed it away. They cannot quitclaim it. They cannot execute any instrument that defeats the remainderman's interest because the remainderman's interest is no longer theirs to deal with. My father's quitclaim deed had attempted to quitclaim whatever interest he had in the property back to himself. A quitclaim deed conveys whatever interest the grantor holds at the time of execution. What did my father hold at the time he signed the quitclaim deed? He held his life estate interest. He had already conveyed the remainder to me 6 years before. He could quitclaim his life estate to himself, which was meaningless but legally harmless. He could not quitclaim the remainder because the remainder was not his. The quitclaim deed had been legally operative as to the only interest he held, which was the life estate, and had conveyed it to himself, meaning it had no effect. The remainder remained mine. I called Grace Adetunji the morning I want to describe what happened when I told Curtis about the life estate deed and what his response had been. I had called him the morning after I searched the recorder and had found both deeds and had spent the evening reading about remainder interests. I had said, I want you to know that there is a life estate deed recorded at the Summit County Recorder that predates the quitclaim deed by 6 years. I had explained what a life estate deed was and what the remainder interest was and what the joinder requirement meant. Curtis had been quiet for a moment. Then he had said that he did not think that was how Clarence had intended things to end up. He had said that Clarence had always spoken about the house as though it were something the family would share. I had said, Curtis, the deed is in the public record, and it says what it says. He had said he would look at it. He had said he would speak to an attorney. I had said that was his right. The conversation had been civil because Curtis is a person I respect, and because I understood that he had not known, and that not knowing had produced a reasonable error. But the legal situation had been what it was, independent of what Curtis had known or not known. The deed had been in the recorder for 8 years. The remainder had been mine for 8 years. What Curtis had not known had not changed what was true. The recorder had held the truth for 8 years. It had continued to hold it after Curtis called. I also want to say something about what Curtis had done after I explained the life estate deed and after he had looked at the recorder and seen it himself. He had been quiet for about a week, and then he had called and said he still intended to pursue the matter legally. He had said his attorney had told him there was an argument to be made about undue influence and about whether my father had fully understood what he was signing when he executed the life estate deed. I had said I understood and that I had an attorney as well. The conversation had been brief. What Grace had said when I told her about Curtis's plan was that the undue influence argument for a deed executed 8 years before death by a person in full possession of their faculties and with the assistance of an independent attorney was going to be very difficult to sustain. She had said the gap of 8 years was the most important fact. A person who was unduly influenced 8 years before they died had 8 years to revoke the deed by filing a new one with the remainderman's joinder. My father had not done this. He had instead filed a quitclaim of his own life estate back to himself, which left the remainder untouched. If he had wanted to change the arrangement, he had known how, and he had the opportunity and the means. He had not done it. He had maintained the remainder in my name. 8 years of maintenance was not the behavior of a person who had been wrongly influenced and wanted a different outcome. The court agreed. Curtis had not been able to sustain the argument after I had spent the evening reading. I described the two deeds. She said I understand the situation. She said the life estate deed had vested the remainder in your name at recording. She said the subsequent quitclaim could not touch that interest. She said we need to probate the life estate termination and record an affidavit completing the title transfer. And if Curtis pursues this, we will respond in court. She said move quickly on the title completion before any claim is filed. My father's estate, which consisted of his personal property and a modest savings account, was opened in Summit County Probate Court. The house was not listed as an estate asset because the house was not part of the estate. The remainder interest had been mine since the life estate deed was recorded. The life estate had terminated at my father's death. I recorded the affidavit completing the title transfer with the Summit County Recorder within 3 weeks of my father's death. Curtis filed a complaint in Summit County Common Pleas. I want to describe the process of completing the title transfer after my father died and about why Grace Adetunji had told me to move quickly. When a life tenant dies and the remainder becomes possessory, the title records still show the life tenant as a co-interest holder until the surviving remainderman records an affidavit of confirmation of title, sometimes called an affidavit of death of life tenant, with the county recorder along with a certified copy of the death certificate. This affidavit establishes in the public record that the life estate has terminated and that the remainder has become possessory. Until the affidavit is recorded, the title is technically incomplete in the public index. Grace had said to file it before any competing claim was filed because a clear and completed title in my name would make any subsequent challenge more clearly an attack on a complete title rather than a question about an incomplete one. We had filed within 3 weeks. The affidavit had been stamped. The Summit County Auditor's records had been updated to show me as the sole owner of record. When Curtis's complaint was filed the following month, the title was clear and complete in my name. The complaint had been challenging a completed title transfer rather than a pending one. This was the stronger position. Move quickly on the affidavit. The life tenant's death triggers the possessory right. Complete the public record promptly. The recorder can hold the complete picture only when you give it one. I also want to say something about what I tell people now when they ask me how to know if they have a remainder interest in a property. I tell them, go to the county recorder portal for the county where the property is located. Search by the property owner's name. Read every instrument in the result list in chronological order. Look for a deed titled Life Estate Deed or that contains the words Life Tenant and Remainderman. If you find one, read it. Find your name. If your name is in the Remainderman section, you have a remainder interest in that property. Note the recording date. That is the date your interest was established. Then look at every instrument recorded after that date. Look for any deed that has your name on it as a signer. If no such deed exists, your remainder interest has not been changed. It is yours. It was yours from the original recording date. When the life tenant dies, you record an affidavit of confirmation of title and a certified copy of the death certificate, and the house is yours in the public record without probate. The process is simple if you know it is there and what it means. My father knew. He told me. I searched. I found it. I understood it. When the moment came, I was ready. That is what knowing your record does. It makes you ready for the moment that tests it. The recorder holds the record. Know your record. Read it. Understand it. Be ready. Court arguing that my father's quitclaim deed had revoked the life estate arrangement and that the house should be treated as estate property. Grace's response addressed the legal question directly. She submitted the life estate deed with its recording date 8 years before my father's death. She submitted the Ohio case law and statutory framework establishing that a remainder interest is a vested property right at the moment of the deed's recording. She submitted the quitclaim deed and demonstrated that its operative effect was limited to whatever interest the grantor held at the time of signing, which was the life estate, not the remainder. She submitted the affidavit of title completion showing the transfer had been recorded. She submitted an analysis showing that the only way to defeat a vested remainder in Ohio is with the joinder of the remainderman, meaning a deed signed by both the life tenant and the remainderman together. My father had not asked me to sign any deed. I had not signed any deed releasing my remainder interest. The quitclaim deed had been signed by my father alone. It could not have conveyed my interest because my signature was required and was absent. The Summit County Common Pleas Court. I want to describe Akron and the South Side. and what the house on Garfield Street had been as a place in the context of that city. Akron is the seat of Summit County in Northeast Ohio, and it has the specific character of a mid-sized industrial city that was built around the rubber industry and that developed the neighborhood character that manufacturing cities develop. Working blocks with modest houses built for the people who worked in the plants and who wanted a house close to work that they could afford on a manufacturing wage. The South Side has neighborhoods where the houses date from the 40s and 50s, and where the character of the original construction is still visible, and where the people who have been on the blocks for a long time know each other the way that long tenure produces. Garfield Street was a block like this. My father had been there for 27 years when he died. The neighbors had known him. The neighbor to the left had been there nearly as long. When I had gone to the house in the days after his death to begin organizing his affairs, the neighbor had come over and had told me things about my father that I had not known, that he had helped repair her porch boards 2 summers ago and had refused to take anything for it, that he had known which of the neighborhood children needed to be watched and had watched them in the casual way of someone who understood that neighborhood is a form of mutual investment. He had been present in that block the way a machinist is present in a shop, attentive, skilled, and oriented toward making things work. I also want to say something about what Akron has meant to me as a city and about what it means to have inherited a house there. I had grown up in Akron and had left for college and had come back afterward and had built my life here, which meant the city was not a place I had returned to, but a place I had stayed in, and that had accumulated the weight of my actual life rather than only my childhood. My father had been part of what holding me here had meant. The Sunday calls, the visits, the house on Garfield Street that was always there as a specific place with a specific character that I had known my whole life and that had been consistent across the changes that lives go through. Having the house now is having that continuity as my own. The neighborhood I grew up visiting is now my neighborhood. The block my father maintained is now my block to maintain. The neighbor to the left who told me about the porch repair is now my neighbor. I have introduced myself to the people on the block who did not know me and have been known by the ones who knew my father as his daughter. Being known as his daughter is a form of beginning a relationship with a place from a starting point of trust. He had built that trust. He had also built the legal instrument that delivered the house to me. Both things are forms of the same thing. He had done the work that made the future possible. The future is this: his daughter, in his house, on his block. The deed made it legal. His 30 years there made it real. Both hold. Assigned the matter to Judge Folake Bello, who had been handling civil matters in Summit County for 12 years. At the hearing, she reviewed the 2 deeds side by side and the recording dates. She asked Curtis's attorney to explain how a deed from a grantor to himself could be understood to convey an interest that had been recorded in a different person's name 6 years before. The attorney argued that the quitclaim represented my father's expressed intention to revoke the life estate arrangement. Judge Bello said Ohio property law does not permit a life tenant to revoke a vested remainder by unilateral deed. She said the remainder had been conveyed and recorded. She said the conveyance was complete. She said a subsequent deed by the conveyor cannot undo a completed conveyance. She dismissed the complaint. I want to say something before I go. I want to end with something about my father's tools and about what happened to the workshop after he was gone. I had gone through the tools over several weekends in the months after his death, and I had kept the ones that I knew how to use and the ones that had particular associations, and I had given the rest to a colleague at the school who does woodworking and who had received them with the specific attention of someone who understood the quality of what they were receiving. The pegboard is still in the basement with the pencil outlines still marking where each tool belonged. The outlines are mostly empty now, but they are still there, and I have not removed them because they are a form of record. This tool went here, this one here. The system was organized this way by this man for this reason. His records had been the same kind of thing, a form of documentation that said this is how I organize my affairs, and this is where the important instruments are, and this is what they mean. The life estate deed in the Summit County Recorder was a pegboard outline in the legal record. This is where this instrument is. This is what it does. This is who it belongs to. His name as life tenant. My name as remainderman. Clear as a tool outline on a pegboard. He had organized his legal affairs with the same precision he had organized his workshop. Everything in its place. Every place marked. The record clear. The result exact. That was who my father was. That is what he left me. The house. and the understanding of how to read the record that says so. Both have held up. Both will. I also want to say one last thing about the phone call and about what I carry from it. He had called on a Sunday evening and had said, "I want you to know it is there and what it means." He had said this because knowing is different from hoping, and because having read the instrument yourself is different from being told about it by someone else. He had wanted me to have read the deed myself in the actual words, so that when the moment came, I would not be relying on someone else's characterization of it, but on my own reading of it. This is what a librarian teaches. Read the primary source. Do not rely on the account of the primary source. Read it yourself. He had understood this without being a librarian. He had understood it as a machinist who knew that the drawing is the specification and that the drawing is what you read, not someone's memory of the drawing. He had told me to read the drawing. I had read the drawing. The drawing was still there in the Summit County Recorder when I needed it. I had been able to say with authority, "I have read it. I know what it says. This is what it says. This is what it means. This is what it protects." That authority had come from his call and from my search 5 years before the moment arrived. He had given it to me. The recorder had held it for me. The court had confirmed it. The house is mine. He made it mine. He told me how he made it mine. I listened. I am still listening. The record holds his voice. Not about Curtis and not about the proceedings. About the phone call my father made to me on a Sunday evening 2 years before he died, and about what it meant that he had taken the time to explain the deed to me and to tell me to look it up and understand what it was. He had said, "I want you to know it is there and what it means." He had said this because he had been a man who understood that the knowledge of what you were protected by was as important as the protection itself. He had been a machinist for 31 years, and he had known the importance of understanding how the tools worked, not just that they were there, but how they worked and why they did what they did. He had applied this same understanding to the life estate deed. He had explained it to me. He had told me to look it up. I had looked it up. 2 years later, I had needed what I had looked up. I had had it. The deed had been in the recorder for 8 years. My name had been in it for 8 years. The remainder interest had been mine for 8 years. I had known about it for 5 years. Curtis had not known about it. The difference between what Curtis had known and what I had known had been one Sunday evening phone call from my father and one search of the Summit County Recorder's portal. The deed holds what it holds. The recorder keeps what it holds. Search the recorder, read the deed, understand what it means. My father knew this. He made sure I knew it too. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story made you feel something, write it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want to hear the story of a woman whose stepfather had recorded an affidavit claiming adverse possession of a parcel her mother had owned, and what the chain of deeds at the county recorder showed about continuous ownership that disproved the adverse possession elements, it is waiting for you in the description below. Click it. Until next time, take care of yourselves. And if someone tells you that a deed from a property owner to themselves has undone an earlier conveyance of a remainder interest, search the Summit County Recorder or your own county recorder and pull up both deeds. Find the life estate deed. Find the recording date. Find your name as remainderman and the date it was recorded. Then find the subsequent deed. Ask, what interest did the grantor hold when they signed the second deed? If they had already conveyed the remainder, they did not hold the remainder when they signed the second deed. They could not convey what they did not hold. The vested remainder was already yours from the day the life estate deed was recorded. A deed signed by one person cannot undo an interest that had already been recorded in another person's name. That is Ohio property law. The recorder holds both deeds. Both deeds say what they say. Read them. I want to say something about the workshop in the basement and about what I found there when I went through my father's things in the weeks after he died. The workshop was exactly as I had always known it. Every tool in its designated place. The pegboard with the outlines marked in pencil so that if a tool was removed and needed to go back, you could see exactly where it went. The drawers labeled in his handwriting. Drill bits, wrenches, sockets, each category sorted by size. He had spent 31 years working in environments where a tool out of place was a tool that caused a problem, and he had carried this understanding home with him and applied it to the place where he did his personal work. The workshop had the specific ordered quality of a space maintained by someone who understood that organization was not an aesthetic preference but a functional requirement. A disorganized tool collection is a collection you cannot use when you need it. An organized collection is one you can use immediately and correctly. He had organized his legal affairs with the same principle. The life estate deed was the right tool for what he needed to do. He had put it in the right place, which was the Summit County Recorder's Index. When the moment arrived when it was needed, it was there, organized, accessible, exactly where a tool that was going to be needed should be. The workshop said who he was. The recorded deed said the same thing. I also want to say something about the screen porch my father had built the summer I turned 12 and about what it means to me now to sit on it. He had built it over 3 weekends in the summer, measuring everything twice and cutting once, which is the machinist principle applied to carpentry. The screen sections were framed in wood and fitted to the existing porch posts with the precision of a person who understood that fit and alignment were not aesthetic considerations but structural ones. The door had a spring latch he had installed himself, and it had worked without adjustment for all the years since. I had sat on that porch through every part of my life that had happened near this house. High school evenings, home visits during college, all the adult Sundays and holiday visits and ordinary evenings when I had been in Akron and had come to the house because coming to the house was part of being in Akron. When the house became mine, I sat on the porch for a long time on the first evening I spent there alone, and I thought about the summer he had built it and about what it meant that the structure he had built then was still there and still doing what he had built it to do. The deed was the same kind of thing. He had built it correctly. It was still there. It was still doing what he had built it to do. The porch held, the deed held, both held because he had built them right. I also want to say something about the tool outlines on the pegboard and about what they show about a person's relationship to their own systems. He had drawn those outlines himself with a pencil and a steady hand in the first years after he set up the workshop. Each outline was a commitment. This tool belongs here and will be returned here after every use. The commitment had been kept for more than 20 years. I know this because when I went through the workshop after he died, every tool was in its outline. There was not a single misplaced tool, not one empty outline with a tool somewhere else. He had maintained the system without exception for as long as the system had existed. The life estate deed had been the same kind of commitment. He had recorded the deed. He had kept his life estate. He had maintained the remainder in my name for 8 years. He had not changed it. He had not allowed circumstances to erode it. He had kept the system intact. When he died, everything was in its place. The deed was in the recorder. My name was in the deed. The remainder was mine. The house came to me. That is what a system maintained without exception does. It delivers the result it was designed to deliver, on time, correctly, without requiring someone to work around exceptions and disorder. He had been a man of systems. His systems worked. His system for the house worked. I am the proof. I want to tell you more about my father, and about who he was, and about what the house on Garfield Street in Akron had meant to him and to us. My father's name was Clarence. He had been a machinist at one of the manufacturing facilities in the Akron area for 31 years, and he had the specific kind of practical intelligence that precision work gives you, an understanding that tolerances matter, that the difference between close and correct is the difference between something that works and something that fails, and that the way to make something that lasts is to do it right the first time, and to understand exactly what right means. He had brought this same precision to the house. Every repair he had made was made correctly. Every project was finished before the next one started. When the furnace needed replacing, he had researched the options for 3 weeks before deciding, not because he was indecisive, but because he understood that a decision made with complete information was a better decision than one made quickly. He had bought the house on Garfield Street when I was 4 years old, and I had grown up in it, which meant the house and I were the same age in my memory, which is to say I had no memory of a time before it. The house was a 2-story frame house on the south side of Akron with a covered back porch my father had screened in himself the summer I turned 12 and a workshop in the basement where he had kept his tools organized in the specific way of a machinist who understands that a tool in the right place is a tool you can use and a tool in the wrong place is a tool you cannot find. The workshop had the order of a professional space applied to a personal one. Everything had a place. Nothing was in the wrong place. He had been in that house for 27 years when my mother died, and in the 2 years after she died, he had reorganized his relationship to the house from the kind a person has with a shared space to the kind a person has with a space that is entirely their own. I want to say something about the conversation he and I had when he told me about the life estate deed and about what the conversation showed about who he was. He had called on a Sunday evening. He was not a person who called without a reason because he understood that calls without reasons were a form of noise and that noise was disrespectful of other people's time and attention. When he called on Sunday evenings, it was because he had something to say that was worth saying. He had said, "I filed something with the Summit County Recorder a few years ago that you should know about and understand." He had explained the life estate deed in the same terms he used to explain anything mechanical, the components, how they fit together, what each one does, and what the result would be when the system operated as designed. The components were the life estate, which was his right to the house for as long as he lived, and the remainder, which was my right to the house after he was gone. He said the remainder is already yours. I said I understand. He said I want you to look it up so you see it in writing. He said the Summit County Recorder portal is free, and you search by my name. I searched it that night. I have never forgotten what I read. I want to say something about why my father had chosen a life estate deed rather than a will or a survivorship deed or any other instrument. He had told me this when he explained the deed. He had said, a will can be contested, and a will goes through probate, and probate costs money and takes time. He had said, a survivorship deed requires us both to be on the deed together from the start, and I want the house to be mine to use and manage for the rest of my life without complication. He had said, a life estate deed gives me what I need for my lifetime and gives you what you need after I am gone, and the transfer happens automatically with no court and no delay. He had been right about all of this. He had understood the instrument he was using. He had chosen it deliberately. He had explained it to me so that I would understand it as well as he did. His understanding of how tools worked had extended to legal instruments. He had chosen the right tool. He had used it correctly. When he died, the tool had done exactly what he had designed it to do. I want to say something about Curtis and about what I understood of his position when he called me. Curtis is my father's older brother, and he had been close to my father in the way of two brothers who grew up together and maintained their bond across different lives. He had not known about the life estate deed. My father had not told him about it, and I had not told anyone about it because it was my father's business and his to disclose or not as he chose. When Curtis found the quitclaim deed in my father's papers, he had found something that looked like a deed and had concluded that it represented my father's final decision about the house. He had not known about the life estate deed. He had not searched the recorder. He had found one document and had stopped. The problem was not bad faith, it was incomplete information. The recorder had the complete picture. Curtis had looked at one piece of it and drawn a conclusion. The conclusion was wrong because the picture was incomplete. This is why searching the recorder is not optional when a property claim is being made. You do not understand what you are dealing with until you have seen all of the recorded instruments. Curtis had not seen all of them. I had. I want to describe what the Summit County Recorder's portal showed when I searched both deeds and read them in sequence. The Recorder's portal for Summit County allows free searches by owner name and returns a chronological list of all recorded instruments for any property. The life estate deed appeared first in the chronological index because it had been recorded 8 years before my father's death. The quitclaim deed appeared later in the index, recorded 2 years before his death. The sequence mattered. The life estate deed came first and had established the remainder interest in my name. The quitclaim deed came second, after the remainder had already been conveyed. A document that comes after a conveyance cannot undo the conveyance. Time flows one direction in the recorder's index, and the law respects this direction. What has been conveyed has been conveyed. What is recorded as conveyed is presumed to have been conveyed. The life estate deed had conveyed the remainder to me. The recording had taken place. The conveyance was complete and could not be undone by a subsequent document that the grantor alone signed. I want to say something about Grace Adetunji and about the quality of her analysis and about why I had chosen her. Grace had been recommended to me by a colleague at the library whose family had used her for a property transfer after a death, and who had said she was precise and did not over-explain and did not under-explain. This was what I needed. I did not need someone who would tell me what I had already figured out. I needed someone who could confirm whether what I had figured out was correct and who could translate it into the legal filings and arguments that the situation required. She had confirmed my analysis within 2 hours of reviewing the documents. She had said, "You have read this correctly." She had said, "The remainder interest is yours from the recording date of the life estate deed." She had said, "The quitclaim did not affect the remainder." She had said, "The joinder requirement is the clearest statement of the principle, and it was absent from the quitclaim." She had filed the affidavit of title completion before Curtis's complaint was filed. She had briefed the response when the complaint came. The briefing had been clear and precise and had addressed exactly the legal questions the case turned on. Judge Bello had found it correct because it was correct. Precision had produced the right result.